Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. I have a theory. It's based on a lot of evidence from the show, but the theory is pretty extreme, so I thought I'd throw it out there and see what people would think of it. My theory is that The Mandalorian is actually about Mandalorians, not, in fact, about the adorable little big-eared green bean that we've come to know and love as Baby Yoda. This show is about the Mandalorian culture, the Mandalorian people, and I believe a great big old Mandalorian MacGuffin. So, I am almost certain from what I saw in episode 8 and looking back what I saw in the rest of the series, Moff Gideon was not after Baby Yoda, not in the least, if that was the original Moff Gideon. I mean, this universe relies heavily on cloning stuff, and Moff Gideon was supposedly executed by the Rebellion. Rather by the New Republic. So, that's kind of a side question, though. Was Moff Gideon, or did they execute a clone? Is the current Moff Gideon a clone? But anyway, Moff Gideon. He was not after Baby Yoda. Not in the least. I don't think he ever was after Baby Yoda. In fact, I believe that up until the point that Din Djarin snatched Baby Yoda from the hands of his holders, I believe Baby Yoda was in the hands of the Empire. Why, then, would they put out the bounty, you ask? Here is my theory. Moff Gideon, spoilers, has the Darksaber. Moff Gideon was the ISB agent in charge of Mandalore. Moff Gideon is after something Mandalorian. Now, we know that the Death Watch made an unholy alliance with the Empire at various points during its existence. We know that from both Clone Wars and Rebels. The Death Watch would work with the Sith, they would work with the Empire. And we have found out that Din Djarin was a foundling adopted during the Clone Wars, when the Death Watch was off trying to be heroic and gain political power, or just honestly trying to protect people. People can have different motivations. So, Din Djarin, he's an interesting character. He has served a rather extreme sect of the Mandalorians religion for nearly 50 years now in universe. He served before the Empire rose in the days of the Old Republic, when Mandalore was essentially, I can't remember if they were completely free of control of the Old Republic, or just more independent than most planets. But he was a Mandalorian during the pacifist period of Mandalore. He was a Mandalorian during the resurgence of the warlike aspect of Mandalorian culture. And he was rescued by Death Watch and raised in the Fighting Corps. Exactly what the Fighting Corps means, but he hasn't taken off his helmet since he signed up, presumably at the age of 12 or 13, traditional apprenticeship age, judging from how old the kids in the village were. So, Din Djarin, this Mandalorian, he's a pretty serious Mandalorian. And given that he was saved by Death Watch, he might have been raised by Death Watch in his training. He might have belonged to Death Watch during the time that they worked with the Empire. Remember that scene in the first episode where the heavy infantry Mandalorian with the Gatling gun comes up and gets in a vibroblade fight with him because he sits at a table with Imperials? That struck me as a pretty extreme reaction to just accepting a bounty, given that he's, a bounty hunter. Money's money, and it goes to help the covert. So why did the heavy infantry Mandalorian have that reaction? Could it be that the heavy infantry Mandalorian belonged to a sect that did not make nice with the Empire during its rule, but Din Djarin's did? We don't want to think of our beloved Mando as having actually worked with the Empire in its prime, but some of Death Watch did. Some Mandalorians did. He could have been one of them. He is a very interesting character, but what was Moff Gideon after? Getting back to the main point. I see this going two ways. I am almost certain Moff Gideon is after something about Mandalore, and Baby Yoda was merely bait that he deliberately put out there. So, he used a foundling as bait. That tells me that he's going after something that only a very traditional, a very religious, as it were, Mandalorian would have. So the first thing that crops to mind, given that the Death Watch, that super traditional warrior type side, has worked with the Empire before, I think that it's a possibility that Moff Gideon might be looking for a Mandalorian. Not just any Mandalorian, a worthy Mandalorian. Moff Gideon has the Darksaber, possibly a Darksaber, but quite probably the Darksaber. As far as I know, there was only one of them ever made. And basically, it's kind of a King Arthur situation. He who holds the Darksaber is sort of ruler of this warlike sect of the Mandalorians. Now, Moff Gideon certainly couldn't claim to be ruler, but he might be looking to play Merlin to a proper ruler of the Mandalorians. What his faction of the Empire needs is clout. They appear to have money, but do they have a cultural presence that makes them attractive? Certainly not. They're weak. They're fallen. Even if people don't hate them, they certainly don't respect them anymore. And Moff Gideon and his troops seems like the kind of people that want to demand respect. Now, if he was able to get a remaining force of Mandalorians to agree to work with him, like Boba Fett did in the Legends, like in Rebels, some of the Mandalorians under the Death Watch did, in that case, it would give him not only the power of just having a bunch of guys who can shoot really good and have jetpacks, but it would give him a cultural foothold on a major power. So he basically, in this theory, Moff Gideon is looking to create a new Paz Vizsla. Get somebody who can rally the Mandalorians together. He has the Darksaber. He can Merlin gift that thing to any Mandalorian he wants, but he wants a Mandalorian who is traditional, who hasn't taken off his helmet, who hasn't broken the code, someone who can rally support from allies. He needs a Mandalorian like Din Djarin. So how does he find this Mandalorian when all the Mandalorians have gone to ground? By putting out a test of skill. First they chum the water with Beskar, something any Mandalorian would be drawn to. Then they use bait that would kind of separate the true Mandalorians from the fake Mandalorians, or the Mandalorians who were still sticking to the way from those who had given up on it. A true believer, as it were. Question: what would a Mandalorian risk everything for? A foundling. So, in this theory, the Empire sells Baby Yoda or hires a bunch of scruffy scallywags to look after Baby Yoda, and then they start sending bounty hunters after them. They give their hired goons a near impenetrable fortress, so the fortress itself is a test of the bounty hunter's skill. Then they find the only Mandalorian that they can. Possibly they did this on other worlds, but on Navarro, remember, only one Mandalorian went above the surface at a time. They couldn't be sure that there was more than one Mandalorian on there. But if there was a covert there, they would need to find them. So what do we see happen? The Mando goes in and takes the bounty, just like all the other bounty hunters. But these bounty hunters have been trying and failing to take that fortress for some time now, according to Queel. He said the trouble had been coming for some time, but he believed that the Mandalorian would be able to end it. Perhaps Queel had seen something of those defenses that suggested to him that a Mandalorian would be capable of taking them down, or rather that they had been made so that only a Mandalorian could get through them. A sort of weeding out of the unworthy. Din Djarin goes to the world where Baby Yoda is being held captive, the princess in the castle, the bait, if you will. The Imperials now know that they have a Mandalorian who is willing to work with Imperials and still keeps a strong code. Now, how do they test that code? They make sure to tell him that it's all right if he will still get the reward if he brings back the prize dead. Dead or alive. Wanted, dead or alive. So, if they had been truly dedicated to getting something that they could only get out of a live Baby Yoda, like midichlorians or whatnot, why would they say dead or alive? At first I thought it was just because they didn't want Baby Yoda falling into someone else's hands. But what if they just flat out didn't care? What if they just needed a foundling and that happened to be the one that they had? So, Din Djarin, who sits at the tables with Imperials. Din Djarin, who has kept the codes through decades through the pacifist regime, the Republic, the Empire, and then the New Republic. Din Djarin rescues the foundling and goes to great lengths to deliver him alive. Those stormtroopers didn't give a rip about that foundling. The only one who seemed to care was Dr. Pershing, and that's a weird thing in of itself. Din Djarin then takes the safe, the large, complex safe that's going to be full of electronics that nobody would really question, and takes it back to the covert. The original 2 plates of Beskar he took back couldn't conceal the tracker, but that, well, the ice cream maker, the safe, it could conceal a very large tracker. So, he takes it back to the covert, the armorer immediately makes him his new armor, then he whips right around, takes out the Imperial safe house, and tears off the planet. And the rest of the Mandalorian covert has to come to his rescue to enable that. So far, everybody I've seen talking about it has just assumed that the covert was taken out because they'd come out of hiding. But what if they already knew? What if the Empire already knew where they were because they'd sent a tracker in? What if it was never Baby Yoda they were after, but the Mandalorians? So, then the Empire would have sent in its hunters and started looking. And maybe originally the Empire wasn't specifically after Din Djarin. But what if Moff Gideon gave the Mandalorians a test? Take off your armor or die. Now, some would have chosen to live, some would have chosen to die, and that would have weeded out the ones who weren't quite as fanatically devoted to the way. What if that pile of armor had come from the members of the covert who had chosen to live? And, of course, those who had died in the firefight. There would have been plenty of those. The armorer, when Din questioned her about what had gone on, she was being very Obi-Wan Kenobi-ish with her answers, talking sideways. And I get the feeling from her character she does that a lot. She is an Athena character, the Oracle, who speaks in riddles. But that character could be a sort of a cover for the fact that if that's what Moff Gideon is trying to do, if he is trying to raise a new, I don't know, High Mandalorian, a new Paz Vizsla, she might be down with it. She's even older than Din. If she was part of Death Watch, she would have worked with the Empire herself. She could be down with this. Again, this is all just theory at this point. But after interviewing the covert, as it were, Moff Gideon or his minions on this planet decide that Din Djarin would be this perfect new, not a puppet, but definitely a figurehead to rally the Mandalorians into a covert that would serve the Empire. You will note that the show itself made a point of the fact that Moff Gideon missed on his first run with the strafing run with the TIE Fighter. The show also made a point he gave them to sundown to think about it. That strange mythosaur skull necklace that Din gave Baby Yoda in the final closing scene. What if that's like a lineage symbol? If this is a lineage of foundlings, there's no genetic line to pass down. You would need to if you were passing down something of important lineage, you'd want a physical marker that they could wear, like a ring or a crown or a necklace. So, what if that necklace has been passed down from, as Queel said, the ancestor that tamed the mythosaur? What if that necklace serves as sort of a mate to the Darksaber? And it turns out that Din Djarin is either knowingly or unknowingly the King Arthur figure, the king in hiding, the king in waiting. And Moff Gideon wants to make use of that. So, that's my King Arthur theory. Let's talk about the second theory, which I think is more likely. The MacGuffin theory. There is some sort of super weapon or high-powered something that will give Moff Gideon power, and he wants that power. But the Mandalorians have the key. Okay, so this is where I get this idea from. Again, it starts out with my observations that Moff Gideon was acting awfully weird for somebody who wanted Baby Yoda. What if, again, he was looking for a very traditionalist Mandalorian sect? And again, the covert on Navarro only went out one at a time. He doesn't know exactly who he's looking for, but he knows what he's looking for. And the someone he's looking for has that what. Going back to that necklace that got an awful lot of screen time. He goes and he tries to lure the Mandalorians out of hiding. Again, they'll probably have done this on several worlds before they got to Navarro, but the Mandalorians don't seem to have a communications network set up. So, he hears there's a Mandalorian on Navarro. He sends in the Beskar as bait, and again sends in the ice cream machine with a tracker. Now, if they were searching for a necklace, this would also allow for all that armor on the floor and the strange dearth of body. And remember, the client knew a lot about Mandalore. What if they were looking for a very traditionalist Mandalorian sect, because only a traditionalist Mandalorian sect would have the MacGuffin that they're looking for? So, again, that is why they would offer up a foundling as bait, and again, they would have planted Baby Yoda in the fortress where Mando found him, a sort of massive test for Mandalorian. They are looking again for a true Mandalorian, but not for what the Mandalorian is, but what the Mandalorian would have. They're looking for one of that lineage, as it were. And again, by the time the tracker went in and Din had to bail the system, there was hardly any time. The Empire arrives, but instead of testing the Mandalorians, they just straight up start murdering them, or searching them, ripping off the helmets to look for that necklace. They're looking for a fairly small chunk of metal in this case, probably made of some type of Beskar, very sturdy, but something that could be easily held under a helmet. So in this ripping off of the helmet would have invalidated these Mandalorians, and they had to strip their armor and leave it and scatter. Those who didn't, of course, die in the firefight, because they allowed an enemy to take off their helmets. The armor made a pretty big deal of that in one of the few lines that she had in the first episodes. You allowed an enemy to take off their helmets. But, of course, the necklace wasn't there because Din Djarin had it around his neck. Somehow they find out that Mando has it, so they have to lure him back in. Maybe they knew he specifically had it at this point, if somebody squealed on him, but it didn't seem that much of the covert knew much about him, even the armor. Or maybe it was just he was the only one they weren't able to search. I'm assuming that this MacGuffin isn't something that can be destroyed or by vaporizer fire, but might be damaged by heavy explosions. So that would suggest that Beskar necklace. Remember the Jawas. The show made quite the point that you have weapons that can destroy organic material or living material and leave all their accoutrements fine. And what was the first big weapon that Moff Gideon brought in? An E-web, which is a type of vaporizing weapon. He said that in the show. So now we have 2 mentions of vaporization. So that might be something there. He brought in something that would destroy flesh, but not metal, not Beskar. Then he sends in an incinerator. And I was curious about that one. They could have pitched in any number of high-grade explosives and just concussed everybody to putty. But they didn't. He sent in a flamethrower. Flamethrower, which is one of the favorite weapons of the Mandalorians, who use Beskar armor because their Beskar armor kind of makes them immune to it. He sent in a tissue vaporizer, a flamethrower, and a bunch of low-level blaster fire, then himself tried to take them out with a specialized TIE fighter that might have had vaporizing weaponry. So, again, I can't see any arguments against him looking for a MacGuffin, a Beskar MacGuffin, and it would explain why he didn't use heavy explosions to pulp them in the cantina. So the armor, being an armorer, knowing more of the history, she seems to be sort of a record keeper for the covert. She would, if this is what Moff Gideon was doing, she would probably be aware of it. Or she might suspect it and not be sure, which is maybe what could explain her sideways answers. But if this is true, either way, either if they're looking for a Mandalorian or a Mandalorian MacGuffin, I'm pretty sure that necklace is the key to some greater power. It got a lot of screen time where it was the full focus. They even let Baby Yoda go out of focus. And the last few seconds of the Mandalorian screen time was the camera just focusing on the necklace. It's going to come back in the next season, and it's going to be pretty important, assuming the show doesn't go sideways. Don't even want to think about that. All right, so those are my two theories. Baby Yoda was never the target. Baby Yoda was only ever the bait. The only one who cared a whit about Baby Yoda was Dr. Pershing. You know, maybe the client got a little attached if they were using the same Baby Yoda for each time the wrong bounty hunter brought him back. Now, this does raise one very dark question. If Baby Yoda was the bait, and they sent bounty hunters after him with the instructions to bring him back dead or alive, knowing that a true Mandalorian, would bring him back alive, a Mandalorian of the proper dynasty, that raises the kind of disturbing aspect that Baby Yoda could have been hurt, Baby Yoda could have been killed. So we know Dr. Pershing has that mark on his shoulder that looks an awfully like the Camino cloning thing. So people have suspected that Baby Yoda might be a clone, or that they might be trying to clone Baby Yoda. Clone is a copy. Could there have been other Baby Yodas first that weren't so lucky as to have been found by Din Djarin? It's a dark speculation, but it is a question that does offer itself up under these situations. So anyway, those are my two theories. Moff Gideon, is pretty obvious to me that he wants nothing to do with Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda is just bait to him. And he's either looking for a Mandalorian, or he's looking for something that a Mandalorian would have. And I think he's either looking pretty specifically. So what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Am I way off base here? Am I reading way too much into too little? Am I overanalyzing? Of course I am. That's the title of the series. All right. Enjoy this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Drop a like if you've enjoyed it, and leave a comment if you want to tear apart my reasoning at the molecular level. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.